Alright, so I'm back. Um, the events updated a little bit and kind of made it a little bit more clear what the intention was. And there were some people in the comments of the last video a little bit confused on what exactly my intention behind the video was. So I made 2 videos before that kind of explaining this a bit better, so I'll just go over it again. My whole thing was, it's not necessarily that I was getting mad at the player base, I'm more upset that the devs have facilitated a system where there's barely any information describing how the entire Galactic War system works in general. Most people don't understand what gambits are. For example, let me just describe it now. If Port Bay was getting invaded by Shoot, if you take Shoot, then not only do you stop the defense campaign on Port Bay, you also take this planet. That's why it's called a gambit, because you need to take this planet before the invasion's over, otherwise you just did it for nothing. So, there's nothing in the game indicating really that's a thing. The most they give you is you'll have some arrows pointed to here to the other planet, but let me show you something. Half the time when that happens, you have the planet information description pop up and block it. There's so many times that there's been a defense campaign, I can't even see where the arrows are coming from on the planet I'm selected over because this blocks it. And on top of that, all they're doing is showing you what planet it's coming from. There's nothing in the game describing to you that if you go and take that planet, you win both at the same time. The only times I've really ever seen the player base figure out that you can do that is during lull periods when there's significantly less players, and it's basically just the core audience that play very consistently doing this. Those players are probably pretty locked into how the game works at this point, so collectively you'll have enough people jumping to the Gambit planet to facilitate something like that happening. Something else I was describing essentially in the last video is when you have 100,000+ people jumping into the event to experience it, these people do not play consistently. So for example, with the Gambit thing I just described, those people probably have no idea that's even a feature in the game. I was also basically explaining most of these people probably don't really understand the DSS. The descriptions on it are, let's just say, not very good. It's very confusing, a lot of the mechanics in this game. That's the main issue with the Galactic War, is they really need to add something in-game.
The Galactic War waits for no.
I'm gonna walk away from that.
Are you ready, Helldiver?
The game really needs something in-game, not Helldiver's companion app, not the wiki, not dev statements on Discord or whatever. You shouldn't need to go out of game to find this information, because especially the people who don't play consistently, they're not going to spend their time doing that because they don't care enough to go find that information in the first place. Even if you have it in game, yeah, there'll be some that don't really care to look at this information. They're just going to jump in and play and whatever. You're just going to have people who do that no matter what. Even for the people who play consistently, you're going to have people who do that no matter what. That's just the nature of the game. But I guarantee you, if you added something, and I was describing this in the other video, if you added something on the terminal here, these have been sitting here since the beginning of the game, unused, don't know why. It would be perfect to add I'm just going to call it an in-game encyclopedia describing how the different game mechanics works. Helldivers 1 actually had this exact system. They even had a bestiary where it described every enemy, what they're weak against, this and that. But it also described in there how different aspects of the game worked. Why doesn't this game have that? I understand the devs have said, oh, they want the player base coordinating, yada yada yada. I even had one person in my comments in the last video say that they just don't want us getting too coordinated because then we'll start doing things that's outside of their control. I mean, they kind of dictate what's in control and what's not. It's pretty obvious at this point that the Galactic War is controlled to some extent, and I can describe why in a different video. But the main issue stands that I don't know why there's not something in the game showing, hey, this is what the Galactic War is, giving a basic overview of it, and then you can go into more detail. What does liberation mean? What affects that? What affects, because if you didn't know, the more players online, it actually scales down how much liberation you do, because liberating a planet is actually based off of the percentage of the player base fighting on that planet, depending on resistance. And now that I mentioned resistance, a perfect example would be explaining what resistance means, explaining to players how these different systems work, what a defense campaign is, what a gambit is, what different things like that, and how the Galactic War functions itself. I think it would be incredibly more interesting if the developers put the tools in game for the players to coordinate, because if we coordinated properly and we're able to do crazy shit, it would actually be way more interesting, due to the fact that Joel or whatever game devs control this, the game masters, would actually have to now start actively finding ways to work around the players making smart decisions, which would make it a significantly better back and forth. Because right now it's just disorganized chaos. And it's very, it feels very artificial on how everything works. For example, I mentioned it that in the earlier videos, we were bleeding players. We're not going to have enough to take Cyberstan, especially because they didn't scale it to the amount of players that were going to log in. I mean, to an extent, that's kind of fair. They didn't know how many people were going to jump into the event, so they just guesstimated on what the player base think they would use. So that's a little bit more excusable. But again, it's just, they don't account for things like that. They don't account for the fact that you have people jumping in, they're not really paying attention to what's going on, there's nothing in game referencing this stuff. Most of the information on how this game functions, you don't really find that out in game. You would never know. You literally have to go on Helldiver's Companion, on out of game sources and resources to find all this information. And I think that's really stupid. It should genuinely just be in game. So that's all I gotta really say. I just want to describe that a bit better, reiterate it again. So, but I will say, Cyberstan event, absolutely fantastic. I love the amount of enemies on the planet. It's absolute chaos. The new enemy units, really, really fun. That they're diverse. They add new mechanics to the game. And the Vox engine,
the efforts of Helldivers
even
across
though
the galaxy are all that keeps the enemy from
Democracy Officer,
doorstep.
even though it's very similar to a War Strider in the sense of its weaponry, it's significantly less obnoxious. One, it doesn't have the grenades that it constantly ragdoll you every 2 seconds, and two, even though it has the same gun mechanics, they don't spawn as often, and unlike the Factory Striders, these things are well designed because they have a proper weak point that can get exploited. So I can go into that in another video, but I do gotta say, they did very good on the planet invasion itself. It's super fun, but they need to change the Galactic War, and there's other things I can point out that need changes, but I just wanted to go over those things again. So, alright, I'm gonna head out now.